Hello, welcome to Board Games with Niramas. I'm Joseph. I'm here with Draco, but also with Nick.
Hello,
And
everybody.
Nick is the designer, one of the designers, I should say, for Terraforming Mars Air's Expedition that we all are excited for. So, Nick, do you wanna tell us a little bit about yourself? So, for the viewers.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I am. My name's Nick Little. My position is the director of game development and production for Indie Game Studios, which is the parent company for Stronghold Games and Indie Boards and Cards. So, I do a lot of design work for both halves, design and development work for both halves, basically. So, I have designer development credits in all the Aeon's End games. I did a legendary game called Legendary Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and there's a bunch of other like smaller box stuff like Kodama that I've worked on that is pretty popular in some areas. But yeah, me and Jacob Frixilius and Sydney Engelstein design Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition.
All right, yeah, yeah, and I understand that like when this came out, I must say when I first saw a picture, it was Steven Bonnecore posted on Facebook. I thought it was like, oh, so another expansion because I wasn't prepared at all for this. Uh,
Yeah.
and I mean, I met up with Jacob Frixelius a few times and so on, and we talked about the dice game and so on. But this was a surprise to me with a card game. So how have the design process worked? Like, have you guys gone back and forth in between, or how do you do when you co-design a game like that?
It's been mostly me and Sydney working on it. Jacob has been working on future Terraforming Mars stuff and the dice game, as well as some other of his side projects. But this game is very heavily inspired by Terraforming Mars, so we did consult with him some on it. But it's a lot of his source material that we draw from, and you'll see as I show you the game.
Yeah.
So yeah.
One question that did arise, because I have been watching, like, obviously, like Rado's playthrough and some other playthroughs before this, and one question that I have to ask you is about the corporations. Is it exactly the same, like the 12 corporations, or is it going to be or like the same with the cards? I guess they are adapted for the new mechanics, obviously, but is it
Right.
going to be new stuff, so to speak, or is it?
So, as much Terraforming Mars content as we could like use the names and the theme to, and places the abilities to, we ported over and we did some rebalancing based on our game engine. I believe that it's 11 of the 12 original corporations made it over. And then I want to say it's about 150 of the 208 cards
Okay,
made it
yeah,
over from Terraforming Mars. Like I said, some of them had to have abilities
yeah,
change
yeah,
because we remove all the take that elements and
yeah.
cities don't exist and so on. But yeah, the majority of the naming convention and kind of what the card does will be very familiar to you if you're super familiar with Terraforming Mars.
Yeah. So about the take that element, because it's always been for me, I usually say like I don't like take that in games, but then
Yeah,
I still love Terraforming Mars. Like it's been an exception for me.
sure.
But I can see. I suppose the reason for removing it was a lot of people don't like it, and was that a hard decision for you, or did it came
It
naturally?
was It was twofold. So, one, functionally speaking, Ares Expedition is a simultaneous action selection game and a simultaneous resolution. So, you and I will process each phase at the same time,
Yeah,
which made some of the take that cards a lot harder to execute. Like if I have a card it steals $3 from you or $7 from you or something, like what is the timing priority?
yeah,
If
yeah,
you only have $10, am I like rushing to play it before you do?
yeah,
So that didn't make a lot of sense. And similarly, there are some cards that cost like plants to play them. So if I used, Deimos down and killed all your plants, like
yeah,
there shouldn't be a speed based element to the game.
yeah,
So we had
exactly.
to
Yeah,
kind of take those. Another part is that in Ares Expedition, initially we didn't even have a player board. So it was just that you would build out your cards and then you would look at your cards to do all the production. So you would just
yeah,
count up all your heat symbols. And we ended up adding a player board because it made it less counting. Like you just keep track of your player board and then you produce on your player board instead of counting up. But what that made it was impossible to make those cards that like stole production from somebody,
Oh yeah.
because we wouldn't have you discard the cards. It wouldn't make sense. So functionally, they didn't work. So mechanically, that was a real hard driving impetus to remove those cards. Secondarily, what I found and what I've heard from a fair amount of Terraforming Mars fans is that like either they don't like take that in the first place, or that the take that cards didn't necessarily always target the person who was winning.
Oh, that's
You know,
true.
if you have
Yeah, that's
if you
true.
have a card that says kill 5 plants,
Yeah,
like
you're
you're
the only
killing the
one with
person.
plants. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily mean you're winning. So they're not doing the job of dragging down the first place player so that it's easier to catch them.
Yeah, that's a
So
good point there. Yeah.
so it was easiest just to kind of remove them and then start from there and go. So
And another thing, I mean, a lot of course, first time I saw this played or so started understanding how it plays, it reminds you of Race for the Galaxy, and
for sure.
so I assume you played a lot of Race for the Galaxy and Terraforming Mars in your
Yeah, a
days.
bunch of both
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm gonna let you start your demo. So just so we get a little bit of an insight. If you haven't seen it before, you can see how it plays. And also, I should say before we get going that the game is on Kickstarter for, well, when this video comes out, it's basically another day. So hurry up and check it out. The link will be down in the description to the video as well.
Yep. So yeah, so this is Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition. I'm gonna walk you through all of the different components here, and then I'll kind of show you how to play the game. So the game, it has a much smaller centralized board, and the board is mostly here just to keep track of how much TR you have, which is outlined here around the edge, how much oxygen there is, which is this meter here next to the oxygen, and then how much temperature there is, which is this meter here. The only tiles that are on the board are these are ocean tiles. Well, they're not flipped yet, but they look like oceans once you flip them. So I can zoom in a little bit on those. But you'll see on each one of these that there's a reward shown at the bottom, or in this case, the top, because it's flipped over. When you flip an ocean, instead of placing them on the board, you'll be flipping them. And when you flip an ocean, you're going to get the reward shown at the bottom as well as a TR. So much of the rule system here is very similar to that of Terraforming Mars. Every time you increase a metric, you're going to gain a TR. Your TR is going to wind up generating you income during the production phase. One rule change here is you start at 5 instead of 20 TR. Part of that is because you can have a lot of production phases very early in the game instead of being like equally spread out, but I'll get to why that is momentarily. You'll notice another thing that's different about the terraforming metric gauges here is they are color coded in sections. This is because when you get to cards that have requirements, let's do some zooming in here. You're required to hit certain color sections of the terraforming metric gauge, the metric gauge here. Instead of referring to particular numbers, we found it was kind of tedious to always check what number they were on, and it doesn't, unfortunately, especially the temperature gauge isn't necessarily like intuitive, right? It doesn't go 0 to 32. Like it starts at a negative number and ends at a positive number, and like you don't know what relation they are to each other just glancing. So this made it easier. Plus, like I said, the board is smaller, so it made it kind of less important to focus in on what's on the board, because really the big thing about Ares Expedition is that it is a card-driven game. And I know a lot of people say, isn't Terraforming Mars a card-driven game? It absolutely is, but the board is a huge part of the game.
Yeah.
Like you're competing over spaces. There's a lot of timing involved. We took out the board in order to make it a shorter and a less expensive experience, but we kept all of the card play involved. So that's a description of the board. You'll see these phase tiles over here, which I'll get to. I guess now we'll jump into how you play the game. So Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition is a simultaneous action selection game, which means that everyone is going to have a hand of these 5 cards. Everybody's hand of phase cards is exactly the same. And what you will do is in secret, you will pick one of these and you will set it face down next to your player mat. So in this case, if I wanted to play the first phase, I would put it face down here. Once everybody is done, you'll flip them face up. So that everybody knows what phases you're playing, you're going to flip over the corresponding tiles. And then starting in numerical order, starting with the development phase, you'll resolve whatever phases people chose. If people didn't choose the phase, you're not going to resolve the phase. So in this case, you wouldn't resolve 2 or 5. Let's go through what the phases do. So let's get a little zooming in here. The development phase says that each player may play one green project card. So you'll notice, just like in Terraforming Mars, there are green, blue, and red project cards. In this phase, everybody can play a green project card, assuming you meet the requirements for that project card, just as usual. They all have MC costs, mega credit costs, just like in Terraforming Mars. A bit of a twist or a difference in this game than in Terraforming Mars is that you're never going to pay to keep cards in your hand. You'll be dealt 8 cards at the beginning of the game. You'll keep all of them. Whenever you draw cards, you'll keep whatever it says that you keep. You don't have to pay for them. Also, you can always discard a card in your hand to gain $3.
Oh yeah.
So if you wanted to play this card that cost 12 and you didn't have $12, you had $9, you can discard a card from your hand and then play this, and there you go. You'll notice on these phase cards that in the bottom, there's a bonus section. And what that means is if you chose this phase, you're going to resolve the bonus. So everybody is going to play all the phases that were chosen, but you'll get a bonus for the phase that you chose. So in this case, it says bonus, pay 3 MC less for the card you play this phase. So in this case, if I played Natural Preserve, it would only cost me 9 instead of 12. It's also important to note here when we're building things, a big difference you'll notice here at the player board. Well, okay, so first, your green cards are where all the production lies in the game, and they're all in this little box down here. So you'll notice that it says during the production phase, this produces 2 MC. So when you play this card, you would take your little cube and move it up to 2. And then during the production phase, you would produce 2 MC, just like in Terraforming Mars, plus your terraforming rating. You'll notice that the player board here looks a lot different, or it looks similar but different from Terraforming Mars. There are some gauges missing and some wells missing to hold the cubes. So there is no energy resource in the game. Basically, everything that produced energy in Terraforming Mars was ported over to just producing heat, and the cards that cared about you paying energy were sometimes able to be sustained and brought over as paying heat instead. You'll also notice that where we have steel and titanium here, there's no place to hold the steel and titanium resources. That's because they don't produce resources in this game. What they do is for each steel that you have, your building cards are going to cost 2 less for each steel that you have. So it's a permanent discount to your building cards. And similarly, your space cards are going to cost 3 less for every titanium you have.
So it's like a permanent. This is more like a representation, right, of what you actually have played.
Right. Yeah. So this is always a representation of what you have in play. You could play the game without these tracks. You would still need a well to hold all of your stuff because it's all done with cubes. You'll also notice that there's this track here, and what this is card draw production. So there are some cards in this game that say during the production phase you draw a card or you draw 2 cards, and you'll track this here. So that's a little bit different. This is basically like a better MC production, since you can always discard a card to generate 3 MC. So yeah, that's the green phase. And in phase 2 construction, the ability is each player may play one blue or one red card. So this is where you would choose to either play one of the blue cards or one of the red cards. If you choose this phase, the bonus is you either get to draw a card or you can play an additional blue or red card this phase. The red cards in Terraforming Mars and in this game are events. They all have the little event tag here. The difference between Ares Expedition and Terraforming Mars is that these cards will stay face up the whole game, so you'll get to count their tags for everything going forward. Yeah. You'll notice some the iconography down here. Obviously, the graphic design is very different from Terraforming Mars, but we have anything that happens immediately on the card has a little lightning bolt to it. So the events all have little lightning bolts, but then some of the blue and the green cards will also have immediate effects, as well as an explanation as to what their ability does here. So in this case, it says it's an action, spend 12 MC to flip an ocean tile, reduce this by 1 MC per titanium you have, and then you have an iconography explanation of what that does.
I think that's one of the the big, the strengths of Terraforming Mars and this game as well is the whole, like, you have the icons, but then you also explain it on the card.
Right.
It's so good. Like, there's so many games where there's like this bunch of icons, and then you have to put out the rule book and figure out what they mean.
I hate that. Like, I feel like you should not have to reference the rule book
Yeah.
except for like when you weird situation comes up. Not every card that has icons, all the cards are laid out so that you can kind of overlap them so that the far left side is showing, because what you care about is tags and the icons moving forward. So that'll save some play space, because especially in some of the lower count games, you can end up playing a fair amount of cards. Also, you'll see this check mark here whenever there's a requirement, and then it'll explain what the requirement is in case you don't understand the iconography here. Also, a little note here. So when you have these cards splayed out in your hand, sometimes it's kind of hard to see that there's a requirement. We put this little yellow double arrow here that points to the right. So that's like, oh, hey, there's a requirement on this card, as a reminder there. Here is where you'll find how many victory points that this is worth, if it is worth any victory points. So you'll see there, and those are counted up at the end of the game. The third phase is the action phase. So this one says each player activates any action effects and standard actions. So this is an action effect on a card. You can activate each action effect on your cards once. It says as a bonus, you can activate an action effect an additional time. This one is obviously kind of difficult to do because it requires so much spending, but there are cards that are just like, hey, draw a card, or hey, produce a plant, or pay $1 to get 3 heat, stuff like that. So stuff that's much easier to kind of replicate. And then you'll see that it mentions standard actions. In Terraforming Mars, these are called standard projects. But in Ares Expedition, you'll find the standard actions here at the bottom of your player board, because your player board serves as a player aid also. So you can spend 20 MC to build a forest and raise the oxygen. So you might be saying, Nick, how do I build a forest if there's no space for them on the board? Well, what they are is you get these little forest VPs. So you just set these next to your mat, and at the end of the game, they're going to be worth a point. Kind of similar to how they function in Terraforming Mars. You don't get like a placement bonus or anything. But also, just like in Terraforming Mars, you'll bump the oxygen, and then you'll gain a TR.
I assume they are a little bit weaker since there's no cities to sort of build them around. So
yeah, and in general, the price that plant resources cost is a little bit lower because of that when they're priced onto cards. So the second one is you can pay $14 to raise the temperature. That's pretty straightforward. And then you can pay 8 plants to gain a forest and an oxygen. You can pay 8 heat. These are very similar to how they are in Terraforming Mars. And like I said, when you flip the oceans, you're going to gain a TR, but also you'll get whatever the reward is here on the back of the cards here, or on the back of the tiles here.
So a bit of exploration almost there, like random what you flip, and
a question that comes up a lot in this is because, as I said, it's a simultaneous action selection game, but I don't think I emphasize that it's also simultaneous resolution. So we both resolve phase 1 in its entirety at the same time. Nothing that I play is going to mess with whatever you play. So we just go ahead and play our cards, and then once we're ready, we move on to the next phase that was chosen. We play our cards, etc. So a common question that comes up is what happens when the temperature is here and we both have a bunch of heat, or we have money that we want to turn into temperature. Well, what happens is everybody is going to get their reward for that. In the phase in which this is capped out, you can continue to bump heat and get TR for it, just so there's no race for it. Now the people say, well, what happens when all the oceans but one are flipped over? Well, when that last one is flipped over, you denote that it's the last one in some way. Either you flipped them in order and this is the last one, or whatever. But basically, everyone can continue to flip this last ocean. So they still get the last reward of the one that was flipped over.
I have a question on this because if I understand it correctly, you can't save plants and heat. Like, you have to turn them in,
correct,
or like transform them. What's the reason for that? Why, like, because I feel in Terraforming Mars that was a big thing, like sitting around waiting with my heat and.
And part of in Terraforming Mars, the reason that you sit around and wait is so you can get those bonuses
Oh yeah,
for
that's true.
hitting
Yeah.
certain thresholds, right? Like it's a strategic part of the game. You'll notice we don't have any of those here because of the issue with simultaneous selection. Also, because you should be able to look at your cards and say how much heat you can produce.
Right.
So you can't get a bonus one from hitting the threshold here.
And
so we
you actually
remove.
explained it, because if everyone gets the reward in the end, there's no reason to hold on to it either, I guess.
It's partially that, but also we took a lot of the plant and animal, or we took a lot of the animal cards and tied them to incentivizing you to complete terraforming metrics, right? So there were some cards that were just totally imbalanced. If I just held all my heat, because it would be like an animal that you needed 8 oxygen to play, and then it would give you like a point every time you bump the heat. So you would build up like 64 heat, and then you'd be like, oh, you finally got enough oxygen. You'd play it, and then you would just blow out the heat, right? So it stunted the game production. It broke some of the animal cards. So we just put it in there so that you're forced to like move the game along, right, when you can. So.
Which I actually like, because I never understood this. Like, I have some friends that they play Terraforming Mars on 2, and they get to like, well, I want 250 to 220, and they play for like 5 hours. I'm like, play 2 games instead. Like, I want to terraform this thing.
Right. Yeah, no kidding. So that wraps up the action phase. As a reminder, your bonus here is that you can complete an action a second time. So you'll see a strategy in the game that comes out a lot is people wanting to play phases 2 and 3 a bunch. What I didn't mention about your phase selection is, let's say that I chose phase 1 the first round. Well, the second round, this card is not in my hand. I have to choose a different phase. So that's a big difference from Race for the Galaxy, where then I'll say, let's say I choose production because I made development last time. Once I flip this over, this comes back to my hand.
Oh, yeah.
So I can't just do one phase over and over again. I have to alternate. So you kind of see some strategies that come out from that itself. Is if you're doing development, you often want to choose production, so you alternate back and forth on these. But if you make a lot of steel and titanium, then production, since they don't produce resources, they're just a discount, those don't necessarily want to go with development. What you want to do is use research, which we'll get to in a minute, but it lets you see more cards if you choose it. So you'll see a lot of the phases kind of develop into alternating between 2 and splashing in a third a fair amount, which is, some people have mentioned that there's not a lot of player interaction in the game because there's no competition over the map and there's no take that element. And while that's true, what phases are played in the game is really important, and anticipating what phase your opponents are going to play so that you can play a different phase and get everything you want done in a generation. Because so it's a little more like kind of latent or implied player interaction, but if you can anticipate what people are doing, it becomes very important. Also, there is something to be said about if you and I both go heavy in heat, we're going to lose out to the people that are going heavy in plants and other stuff because we're going to run out of temperature to bump, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you don't want 2 people going too heavy in one direction. So the 4th phase is production, which says each player gains heat, plants, and draws card according to their production. They also gain MC equal to their production plus TR. So this one is like the easiest one to understand from Terraforming Mars. You literally just produce what these things say, and then you check your TR and produce what that says. The bonus here is you gain 4 MC. So
and that's more sort of proportional than it would be in Terraforming Mars, right? Like 4, sort of.
Yeah, exactly. The thing here about production, and what it was kind of hard to figure out balance wise in the whole game, was when you play a game and you know that every round you're going to play every phase, and you get to the end, and with Terraforming Mars you have a feeling of like how many actions everybody's going to take during each generation. Now typically it ramps up, but you know that like the pacing of the game is tied to you're producing every so many actions basically. With this being its own phase that could get played every round, you don't know, then it can accelerate, and then people can go, well, now that I got all these cards, I want to build them all. So then it can kind of slow down. It just depends on the game. I've played games where like 60% of the turns we play production, and I've played games where like 30% of the turns we play production, and it's really based on what people are doing with their strategies, and whether people were like, well, I don't want to choose it, you better choose it because I want to look at more cards, or I want to use my actions, So it's all the cat and mouse therein. The fifth and final phase is the research phase. This one says all players draw 2 cards and keep 1, so you discard the other one. You always, as a side note, you always discard face down, just so people aren't counting what cards are gone. And then the bonus is you draw an additional 3 cards and keep an additional 1. So you're drawing 5 cards and keeping 2. So this is where it can get really good for you to like look for those space cards or those building cards if you have 3 titanium, you know, or there's like a decent amount of cards that reward you for playing events, but there aren't a lot of events in the deck. So getting to look at more cards will, you know, get you more chances to look at it. So research just helps you really drive home your strategy hard if you're one of those that cares about specific cards in the deck. And again, you can always just research, and then if you don't like the cards that you got, you can just discard them for money. That was the thing that I always kind of found frustrating with Terraforming Mars, was when you played a card to draw extra cards, if you didn't see something you needed, then it felt like a waste because you were kind of getting charged $3 per card. But if you discard them, you're only getting 1, you know, as far as the cost it was to draw those cards. So yeah, so that's how the game is played. Basically, now that you have a context for how the game is played, let me tell you, you know, how it starts. There are 12 corporation cards. Everybody will be dealt 2. So looking at these, well, these are both the titanium ones, Saturn System and Phobologue. But this is, you know, the United Nations Mars Initiative and Phobologue. So you might be dealt these 2. So you would be dealt these 2 cards, and then you'll be dealt 8 project cards. So, you know, this is different from Terraforming Mars because it's not 10. But also, like I said, you're not going to have to pay for any of these. Yeah. So this is essentially like, if you didn't want any of these, this is just $24 extra, basically, just sitting there. We got a lot of blue cards. So you would look at all of these, and then there's an advanced rule, and it's one of those advanced rules that I expect everyone to play with, either in their first game or after their first game. But before you pick which one of these 2 you want to play as, you can discard any number of these cards to draw that many.
Oh yeah, like a mulligan.
Yeah, like a mulligan, exactly. We didn't put drafting in the game because the goal was to kind of make the game, you know, play quick and also to not overwhelm people on their first play. I don't think adding drafting would not bog down the game, but it would only really apply to this phase. There's no during the setup. There's no good way to implement it into the research phase because you're drawing different amounts of cards, or you're drafting from 2 cards, which is barely even drafting. So if you wanted to do that instead of mulliganing or in addition to mulliganing, you certainly could. It's going to add 5 minutes to your game or whatever. But we found that like being able to mulligan kind of gave you enough, like you looked at enough cards in order for it to make sense.
If I know my game group well enough, we're probably going to draft in the beginning. People love that. So yeah. But there's no like, and that's nice here because as you say, it's just one time. So like you don't do every generation. So
yeah. Yeah, because that was another thing that I wanted to address in this game was like, in Terraforming Mars, even when we did draft, I just didn't feel like I saw enough cards for my strategies some of the time. Or you were like, yeah, there's enough cards to do the core like 3 or 4 strategies that are implemented, but then you get the weird corner case card that you're like, I want to make this card work, right? And in Terraforming Mars, it's often hard to do because you can't find one of the 2 or 3 other cards that go with it. And Ares Expedition, you can just keep choosing research, and like there's a good chance that you're going to see one of those cards, but you're sacrificing, you know, you're choosing research, but it's not that big a sacrifice because you're still getting all those cards.
Because there's still money as well. So that's
right. There's still there's still money as well. You're still moving forward. You know, like if you want to compare the bonuses on all the cards, you know, this one is a discount of $3. This one is draw a card or play an additional card, so it could be $3 if you chose to draw the card. You know, it's hard to say what an additional action equates to, but it's a big range. This one is 4 MC, so technically speaking, it's like it's better than the $3 here, but also you're relying on somebody else to choose development and so on. And then the research is draw 3 cards and keep 1. To me, we kind of value that as about $4 because the selection element to it, it's at least 3. But also if you get a card that's worth more than 3 when you play it, you know.
Exactly.
So they're all kind of, the bonuses kind of equal out, but they're all different, you know what I mean? And a lot of times when you choose construction phase, it's because you want to play 2 cards, you know, and this is the only like clean way to play 2 cards in the game. There are a few cards No, this one used to have it, but there are a handful of cards that allow you to play a second card in the
Okay. Yeah.
phase, or play a card for free. So there's a few green cards that are like you can play a green card that costs 9 or less from your hand for free. Um,
And here we
but
also
yes,
see the like two of these cards here have the in the bottom left there that you actually have like a steal ongoing.
yeah,
So you have
yeah.
that discount.
Yeah, you notice that they're in silver or gray instead of the orange. The orange is tied to production
Yeah.
phase because you have the production card here. The gray is just tied to it's called a capability instead of a production because it doesn't produce a physical resource. Also, to zoom in on these, they'll tell you what phases that they are used. So these are actions,
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
and they're done in phase 3. This is production. It's done in phase 4. This is a capability. It's done in phase 1 and 2.
Oh, yeah.
So it's kind
Yeah.
of like a gentle nudge reminder, what these cards do
Yeah.
during the certain phases. So
Yeah, I really
the
like the graphic layout. It feels so like easy to get into. Like, of course, I played a lot of Terraforming Mars, but I think even if you haven't and you look at this, you can understand what you're supposed to do, sort of.
right, yeah, and you'll notice the purple here. The purple is for effects. So the blue cards with effects will have the
Ah,
purple
okay.
background
Yeah.
here. So this one is just when you play a card, you pay 1 less for it. It's like a baby Earth catapult, basically,
Yeah.
with a science tag. So
Yeah, that's actually good as well. I mean, thinking from Terraforming Mars as well, blue cards are like two different categories. It's good to mark that out. Like, this is an effect, this is an action. So
right,
I know
yep,
when teaching Terraforming Mars, you always have to like, oh well, it's the red arrow. That's what you need to look
right.
at. Yeah.
Yeah, and we have that here too, the red
Yeah.
arrow versus
Yeah.
the colon. But like sometimes when you're playing a game new, you need a bigger kind of gesture
Yeah.
towards
Yeah.
what it is. Here's a blue card that has an instant effect here. So
Oh
when you
yeah.
play this
Yeah.
card, you gain 3 plants, and then it allows you to discard a card to gain 3 more plants. So
I think that's a new one, right? Like for this game.
yeah, this is a
Yeah.
new one. Yeah.
Can we? I mean, I guess that's very early to talk about, but is there like a roadmap? Like, are we gonna get expansions like the base game, like the not base game, but the Terraforming Mars game, so to speak?
We definitely had some people on Kickstarter say, where are the preludes?
Yeah.
Right. Well, Terraforming Mars is like a 3-hour game, and when you play it with preludes, it's like a 2 hours 15 minutes, 2.5 hour game. So like it's great that you're cutting that time off. In Ares Expedition, we noticed that the average playtime is like 60 to 75 minutes,
Yeah.
right? And in a higher player count game, like if you're playing 4 players, you're playing like on average 14 or 15 cards.
Yeah.
And what we didn't want to do is introduce preludes to make it so that you're only playing like 10 or 12 cards because it just didn't feel like a satisfying engine buildy type thing for that. And I didn't want to say, let's introduce preludes for just 2 players, because like, even though you have 2 people doing the same work as 4 people, the turns go so much faster when you're playing 2 players that even the 2-player games end in about an hour typically. It again though, it's a game where like you get 8 cards, 8 project cards in your hand, you have 5 phase cards. There are a lot of things you can do. If you're prone to analysis paralysis, this game is going to take you longer, but my guess is Terraforming Mars took you longer. And what we found through open play testing is that this game plays basically in about or a little under half the time of Terraforming Mars. So if you're somebody that plays Terraforming Mars in 5 hours, this game's probably going to take you like 2 hours. And like that was a playtester replied to us and said, this is so great. I love it. I feel like I'm playing Terraforming Mars in like 2 hours. It's awesome. It's half the time that we normally play. And I'm like, whoa, 2 hours is long. And he's like, yeah, but it's still so much shorter than what we do. And I'm like, yeah, I guess like if that's what you want to do and that your group is down with that, that's fine.
I think the biggest change in, like, I'm thinking for my game group and so on, when we're gonna sit down with this in the future, is that like the whole simultaneous thing, because as we talk about the AP, of course, if someone is slow there, we're gonna have to wait for them anyway. But in Terraforming Mars, when it's this person's turn, then you can go grab a coffee or something because it's gonna take a while before he's done. Here's at least I get to do something while he's doing his stuff. So
yeah. So as far as like expansions go, like if we find that people are taking the game is taking longer than we kind of expected, I'm totally down to do preludes. I think kind of an obvious addition would be to put the milestones, find a way to put the milestones and the awards back in some way. and I think Race's first expansion does something very similar to awards and milestones. So I could see that being a part of like the first expansion probably. But, after making Aeon's End, what the biggest success thing for us in Aeon's End was we put that game out there. And if you're a game designer, or if you really think about it, the first week that your game is published, it's going to get played more than you ever play tested it.
Yeah.
So many people are going to play it. Like right now, I think the Kickstarter has like 15,000 backers. We didn't pay 15,000 this game 15,000 times. You know what I mean? So people are going to find things that they like and they don't like about it. We didn't have 15,000 people give us feedback. So like I would prefer to like give it some space and see what people want from an expansion, instead of just going, oh, here's the roadmap. The next one is this, and the one after this, and then exactly. I want to hear what you guys wish was better about it, and so on, and then we can kind of try to address that going forward. Of course, we have feedback from Terraforming Mars. Like we know what some people did and didn't like about some of the expansions. So like we already know some things we do want to do and we don't want to do. But also, Ares Expedition is a different game. So
when is the it's on the Kickstarter page obviously. When is the delivery for the Kickstarter?
September.
Okay, well that's fairly quick for Kickstarter. Yeah. So I mean, I really look forward to this. I already backed it obviously, and look forward to dive into this. And I've done a lot of solo playthroughing of Terraforming Mars as well, and I've seen the solo setup for this. Was it 25 actions you could do?
Yeah, to give a quick explanation for the people that it sounds like you've researched it.
Yeah.
So when you're playing solo, you have your hand of action cards and you're going to play them as usual, but you also have a dummy player who you shuffle and then you reveal, and then you'll also play that phase. And then you'll reveal the next one and you'll also play that phase. So you're really trying to not double up here. And right off the bat, it's kind of hard. Like you don't know what they're going to choose, but it's a 1 in 5 that you might double up. But now when you're doing your fourth action, you're like, oh, well, I can take development. And I know that he's going to choose either phase 2 or phase 4, right? So you do this and you start out, you put a cube on the 1 space here. And then once you've played all these, you advance this to the 2 space, you flip this all over, which of course this is going to be annoying because TTS. And then you shuffle up and you can go again. Now, when you do this, if you're playing beginner mode, you pick one of the metrics to move up twice. So it's like the dummy player's helping you advance. If you're playing novice mode, you just move up once. And if you're playing advanced or expert, you don't move it up at all. And that one's tough. Like I don't win that one every time. But then, so once you've gone through, so you'll go through this deck again in the random order. Once you get to done with the 4th one, you go to the 5th one and you get to pick in which order these phases happen. So it gives you a little more control over the final go through. Maybe you've decided that you want him to save the action phase for dead last so that you can cash in all of your plants and heat then. It is challenging for sure. Even a novice, I think it's hard. And that's with somebody that's, I'm familiar with all the cards and I know what you should do. I definitely had a couple of reviewers reach out and they were like, whoa, this is super hard. Like, how do you even do it? And I had to like give them a little nudge in the right direction. And they're like, oh yeah, now I see it. And I'm like, cool. Yeah.
I really look forward to playing it solo as well, because like the challenge and then like trying to solve the formula, like how do you, because it's going to be a different kind of experience than Terraforming Mars, obviously, because of this order. And I like that it's a sort of dummy player, but it doesn't do anything. Like it just dictates what I can do, which so I don't need to sit around and like have a full automa or something.
Right. Yeah. There's no real AI to it at all. It's just like randomized phases coming at you. Yep. Right. There's a 2-player co-op version of the game as well, where you work together. You can talk to each other about everything that you want to do. You're not allowed to discuss specifics of your cards, but that's mostly just so that the game doesn't bog down into you guys sharing hand information. But you can definitely talk about phases and like, I'm going to make a lot of heat. Okay, I'll make a lot of plants, or I'm going to choose this phase to do whatever. And it's on a timer, and the timer is set up by you. You end up placing a bunch of copper cubes here on the board, and a few player cubes. So it's 4 player cubes and 26 copper cubes. And what happens after you reveal your face card is you're going to take either a copper cube and add it as $1, or you're going to choose a player cube, discard it, and then you can each trade a card in hand.
All right.
So if you've got a lot of titanium and I drew a space card, then this is a perfect spot for us to swap to what we do well. And then your goal is to complete the whole metrics, and you need to score, I believe it's 70 points or 80 points, I think, together in order for you to complete it.
Well, that's really cool. I think that's nice to have a co-op variant as well.
Yeah.
All right. Well, very excited to play this in September, hopefully, as soon as it lands. And do you want to add anything to the viewers about the game, or?
I think that's it. I think if you love Terraforming Mars, I think you're going to love it. I think if you like Terraforming Mars and this doesn't sound like you're going to like it, then like it probably won't. Like you love Terraforming Mars for the few reasons that like we pulled out of the game.
Yeah,
you know what? I get it. Terraforming Mars has like lots to like about it, right? So like if you're specifically into the take that stuff and the board part, then I get it. This may not be for you, but I think that like most of the videos, including this one, will give you a great rundown of like what it is, and if you want the option to play Terraforming Mars or get that Terraforming Mars experience in like an hour to an hour and a half, I think this is really going to hit home with you.
I feel it's different enough that I can see, like, I want to have both in my collection, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much to Nick for joining here and showing this to us. I'm hope that when you see this, you have time, go check out the link in the description for the Kickstarter. There's a lot of information there about like, well, it's not called stretch goals, but like milestones, right? Like things that were like unlocked as the Kickstarter went on. Go check it out. And thank you so much for watching. Have a great evening, morning, or whenever you're watching. Take care. Bye-bye.
Be like Draco. Follow Board Games with Niramas on Facebook at BGW Niramas.